2024 was a special season for the Sun Devils, but it was nowhere near the best season in program history.
You are Locked On Sun Devils, your daily podcast on the Arizona State Sun Devils. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back to the Locked On Sun Devils podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. My name is Richie Bradshaw, and I will be your guide for everything Arizona State Sun Devils. Shout out to my everydayers who are here every day, and thanks to all of you for making us your first listen of the day. Today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Ladies and gentlemen, it's time to have what I'm sure will be a civil and not controversial conversation about the greatest Sun Devils football teams of all time. I'm going to give the 2024 season a chance later on in the show before I give out my verdict for the best season ever and all that good stuff. But we have to start the show with some of the greatest teams in Sun Devil history. There were 6 teams that really stood out to me, and then an honorable mention. And I'm going to hit you with the honorable mention right now is the 1957 team. They were 10-0 conference champions in the Border Conference, which I am not familiar at all. Dan Devine was the head coach. Their best player, Leon Burton, ran for 1,126 yards and 16 total touchdowns, both of which led the nation. They didn't have any ranked wins. They had 4 shutouts. They allowed under 7 points per game and almost scored 40 points per game. Yes, they won the Territorial Cup, and no, they did not go to a bowl game. Definitely a team worth mentioning, but talk about a very different point in time for the Sun Devils. We are going to go chronologically here from the newest team to the oldest team now moving forward. The newest team that I would put as one of the best ever for the Sun Devils, I would go 2013 instead of 2014. Now, I know that may strike a chord with some, but the reason why is because ASU was able to go to the Pac-12 championship game that year, and 2 of their 4 losses came to Stanford, who won the Pac-12 that year, and then one of their other losses was a Holiday Bowl loss to Texas Tech. But let's take a look at that team. 10-4 overall. They did not win the conference championship. In fact, they were crushed at home, 38-14. It was a Todd Graham-led team. There was a lot of good players on that team. A lot of guys that'll kind of make you nostalgic here. Taylor Kelly, Jalen Strong, DJ Foster, Marion Grice, Zane Gonzalez, Carl Bradford, Will Sutton, Alden Darby, Demarius Randall. They had 3 ranked wins that year, including number 20 Wisconsin, later on number 20 Washington, and number 14 UCLA. Yes, they won the Territorial Cup 58-21. The legacy of that team, it's pretty simple. They just couldn't get it done. It was a really good team that just could not overcome Stanford. They had 2 shots at Stanford that year. They lost both of them, and then they didn't win the Holiday Bowl. Let's rewind to what I think a lot of people consensusly agree is the best team in Sun Devil history, and that's the 1996 Sun Devils program. 11-1 that year. Yes, they won the Pac-12. Bruce Snyder was the head coach. They go on to the Rose Bowl. We'll talk about that in a moment. That team was stacked. Jake Plummer, Terry Battle, Keith Poole, J.R. Redmond was on that team, and that was way before he became a program legend. Fun fact, Isaiah Mustafa was on that team, and if you don't know who that is, that's the Old Spice guy. That's the commercial where he's like, look at me, now look at your man, now look at me, I'm on a horse backwards. The Old Spice is pearls. That's him. That's Isaiah Mustafa. So he was on that team, fun fact. Defensively, Pat Tillman, Vince Amy, Derek Rogers was an All-American linebacker that year. They were stacked. They had one of the greatest wins in program history, too, defeating number 1 Nebraska 19-0. Unbelievable game. Obviously, they won the Territorial Cup 56-14. They went to the Rose Bowl. 1 game remaining for them to be champions of the entire college football. Then lost to number 4 Ohio State 20-17. Had to play some prevent defense on the last drive, and it cost them a chance for a championship. And that is the legacy of that season. It's the season of what could have been. Would better play calling in the end of that game have gotten ASU their first and only national championship? Let's rewind again. 1986, another team that could be considered the greatest of all time. 10-1-1 was their record. Yes, they won the Pac-10 that year. Their head coach was John Cooper. That was a fun team too. Jeff Van Raphorst, one of the voices of the Arizona State Sun Devils, as he sits down with Tim Healy for the radio broadcast. Darrell Harris was their leading running back. Aaron Cox, a really fun throwback name, was their number one receiver. Randall McDaniel, who goes on to be an NFL Hall of Fame offensive guard. Eric Allen, he's a finalist for the Hall of Fame this year. Sean Patterson was their best pass rusher, and Stacey Harvey was their top linebacker. He had a 100 tackle season that year, which back then was pretty unheard of. They had a bunch of ranked wins that year too. This was a proven team. They beat number 20 Michigan State, number 16 UCLA, number 15 USC, number 6 Washington, and number 4 Michigan, which of course was their Rose Bowl, was against number 4 Michigan, 22-15 win. Yes, they won the Territorial Cup. Excuse me, no, they did not win the Territorial Cup. That was their only loss on the year because they had a tie earlier year, I believe, to Washington State. They lost that game 34-17, and I think that loss is probably what cost them a national championship. But the legacy of that season was that ASU got to smell the roses for the first time in program history. It's an all-time team. You look at that roster, and there's so many guys that had impacts at ASU and had impacts in the NFL too. 1975. We'll start off with this. The legacy of this team is we were shorted a national title. We can just call it what it is. ASU should have absolutely won the national championship that year. 12-0 team. Yes, they won the WAC back then. And unfortunately, that'd be the reason they didn't win the national championship, was the disrespect that the conference had at the time. Frank Kush, the one and only, was the head coach of that team. His best players included Dennis Sproul, one of the best quarterbacks in program history, Freddie Williams, John Jefferson, the superstar receiver, arguably the greatest receiver in program history. Al Harris was their star pass rusher, and they had, of course, arguably the greatest defensive back in program history, Mike Haynes. They had 2 ranked wins that year, which included number 6 Nebraska and number 12 Arizona. So yes, they won the Territorial Cup 24-21. Their bowl game was the Fiesta Bowl against number 6 Nebraska, 17-14. A statement win. That was Nebraska in the height of when they were a blue blood program. That 1975 was a huge year for the Sun Devils, and if they were in just about any other conference, they would have been named the number 1 team, and therefore the national champions. 1973, another Frank Kush team. They were 11-1. Yes, they won the WAC. Ladies and gentlemen, Danny White was the leader of those Sun Devils teams, and he had some good help. Woody Green and Benny Malone each ran for 1,000 yards that year. Morris Owens is number 1 receiver. Mike Haynes was still there, and Bob Bruning was a stud linebacker. They somehow did not have any ranked wins that year, but don't worry, they won the Territorial Cup 55-19. They won another Fiesta Bowl over Pitt 28-7. That legacy is the one loss they had that year was to Utah. And if I read it correctly, they had 10 turnovers in that game. That was a loss that truly dismantled what could have been a special season and maybe a chance to also try for a national title. And then 1970 is the last team I want to talk about. Another Frank Kush team, another 11-0 team. Yes, they won the WAC. That was another team with a lot of fun names. J.D. Hill, the stud receiver. Dave Buchanan and Bobby Thomas, who was the leading runner on the team. Buchanan ended up coming on later on in his career at ASU. And Junior Ayu was their star pass rusher. 0 ranked wins. Again, Now, you look at 73 and 70, and that has a lot more to do with playing in the WAC than it did anything else. Hard to find those ranked wins. But they did win the Territorial Cup 10-6. What a barn burner. And they went to the Peach Bowl, and they beat North Carolina 48-26, and that was a statement game for ASU. It put them on the map because back then everyone talked about sandlot football was the WAC, and even the early parts of the Pac-10, it was sandlot football. You just didn't respect what ASU was doing. So they go on and play UNC, and they not only win, they smacked them. They absolutely crushed the Tar Heels. In the Peach Bowl, not a small bowl game. A lot of good teams there. 2013, 1996, 1986, 1975, 1973, 1970, and 1957. Well, how does the 2024 team stack up? That's coming up next. This is the Locked On Sun Devils podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Attending NFL playoff games is an experience like no other. The energy, the excitement, and the connection with other fans is unmatched. I remember the thrill of going to the ASU Peach Bowl game earlier in the year, and it's a memory I'll never forget, especially because our friends at Game Time were able to help me save some money on it. This year, Game Time makes it even easier to create those unforgettable moments for yourself with the Game Time Picks feature that's going to filter out the fluff, rather, and shows you the best deals on great seats so you can focus on what matters most, and that's being there. I use Game Time Picks to get my tickets for the Peach Bowl. It couldn't have been easier, and I found a great deal for me thanks to Game Time Picks, and I got to save on the seats. The seats that I also got to preview before I bought them to make sure that I liked it. Their all-in pricing is a game changer. There's no surprise fees at checkout. You can also track your tickets. They're backed with the Game Time guarantee, which gives me complete peace of mind. And speaking of their guarantees, their lowest price guarantee. If you somehow find tickets in the same section and row for less than what Game Time offers, they're going to credit you 110% of the difference. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account, redeem code LOCKEDONCOLLEGE. That's Locked On College for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. Thank you all so much for tuning in to make Locked On Sun Devils your first listen of the day. How does the 2024 Sun Devils team stack up with some of the greats? Well, I'm glad you asked. And obviously, we can talk about them quite a bit, considering we got to witness them this year. Instead of diving into the past, we only have to think a few months ago. Let's take a look at 2024. Let's start with the legacy of this season. And the legacy, there's a lot to it. Essentially, it was that Kenny Dillingham has reestablished Arizona State Sun Devils football as a program to be respected. We're going to go from there. No secret, you listen to this podcast, you know that I believe the sleeping giant that is Arizona State has been awoken, and that we are going to see ASU start contending on an annual basis. But at a minimum, you have brought validity back to the program because of Kenny Dillingham. The team went 11-3 this year. This is Kenny Dillingham's second year with the program. They go 11-3. Yes, they're conference champions in the Big 12, first year in the Big 12, and fun fact, their first conference game championship. They have never played a conference championship game before. 18 conference titles, by the way, between the Border Conference, the Western Athletic Conference, and the Pac-10 back then. 18 conference titles. They have never won a championship game. That's crazy to think about. But they not only won, they flat out stomped Iowa State 45-19. Yes, they won the Territorial Cup that year. We all remember 49-7. What a beautiful game. A lot of ranked wins that year. Now, people look back and they go, well, that wasn't as good a win as it should have been, and this, that, and the other, and blah, blah, blah. And I kind of don't really hear you. You play the teams that are in front of you. And if they're ranked at the time, well, guess what? That's a ranked win. They beat number 16 Utah. They ended up being bad. Well, they were ranked at the time. So that's a ranked win. Number 20 Kansas State, number 14 BYU, and of course, number 16 Iowa State. That's a lot of ranked wins. That's a lot of ranked wins. You had a really good team. Sam Levitt, Cam Scatteroo, Jordan Tyson. That tells the story on offense by itself. Defensively, CJ Fight, Keyshawn Elliott, Caleb McCullough, Xavion Alford. And I mean, I could go on and on about this team. There was a lot of great players on this team, a lot of whom, by the way, are returning for 2025 to run it back. So maybe we'll talk about the 2025 team in a year from now with how it compares to these other teams. They made the college football playoff for the first time in program history. The only other team to sniff that was the 2014 Sun Devils, a team that I left off, and I'm sure that will be a bit controversial. I am 100% positive that will end up being controversial. Now, for what it's worth, the reason I left them off was they did not get to the Pac-12 title game, and they did not capitalize on what should have been an incredible season. They were as high as the number 6 team in the nation at one point before they lost to Oregon State, and then they lost to Arizona and gave up on the season. Maybe it could have been different, but unfortunately that season just didn't have the postseason that these other teams had. It was just a season of potential. 2013, they were right there. That's the difference for me. But, I'm sure that's not a popular opinion. That was the closest that ASU had gotten to a college football playoff previously. Well, they got it this year by winning the Big 12 and finishing as one of the top 12 teams in the country. They were able to get to the college football playoff where they put on quite a show, and they took Texas, number 4 Texas, per the ranking, not per the seeding, obviously. What did Texas end up being anyways? Number 8? Something like that? Because ASU ends up hosting Texas, or not hosting Texas. They're hosting, quote unquote, but they take them to the Peach Bowl, and they gave them a run for their money. 38-31 loss in double overtime. That is quite the way to establish yourself and have your coming out party in this new year of Kenny Dillingham and say, hey, we're here to stay. This is Arizona State Sun Devils football for now until the end of time. Better get used to it. Quite the statement. We'll see if they can continue building off of it, but at a minimum, this was a very, very, very special year. And again, that is the legacy of the 2024 season. Is it was a program-defining year, and it was a year that really turned the ship around from this program is in the darkest place it's ever been, and it turns around in 2 years, and it's like, okay, well, this program is in the brightest place that it's been in decades. There's a chance for this to be a sustainable football program moving forward, and that's something that should get fans incredibly excited about the future prospects of the Arizona State Sun Devils. So much is coming back for 2025, the entirety of the coaching staff and the roster. And that should be exciting because of what this roster and this coaching staff just did this year with zero expectations. And look at how they ran the table. Look at how they took a blue blood Texas program to the brink of a huge upset loss. Nobody gave ASU a chance in that game. I think they were 8.5-point underdogs. And I'm pretty sure outside of the state of Arizona or places that just hate Texas, you weren't going to find very many people that took ASU. And by the end of that game, there was a lot of people that were like, you know what? ASU knows ball. That's what made this such a special season for ASU. What made it one of the best seasons of all time for ASU. The question, though, is it the greatest season of all time? It's got an argument, but did I give it the edge? We're going to find out in just a moment on the Locked On Sun Devils podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. One last time, thanks as always for making Locked On Sun Devils your first listen of the day. Shout out to my everydayers who are here every day. It's the time that you have all been waiting for. Where does the 2024 Arizona State Sun Devils team rank all time? We are taking the 6 from earlier. I am not including that 1957 team since that was an honorable mention. So we are taking the 2013, 1996, 1986, 1975, 73, and 70 teams for Arizona State. And we're going to rank them 1 to 7. To me, these 7 teams stand out amongst the rest. And you can put 2014 in there, and that's fine. Totally valid. I gave my reason why I didn't put it in there. You can rip me to shreds, and I would totally understand it. That was a special team, but they couldn't finish. Anyways, here's what I'll say about 2024 before we get to the rankings. 3 very important things. The first is that this 2024 team has the chance to start a new era, just like 1970 did for Frank Kush. That was the coming out party of the Frank Kush era. That's when ASU established itself as a powerhouse in college football that nobody was giving the time of day to. Very special year. It also was the first year that ASU had a title bid since 1996. And ASU came down to one final drive in 1996 to win the national championship, and they came up short. And in this game, they were a couple of plays in overtime short of advancing to the next round. They would have played Ohio State. Would they beat them? Probably not, but who knows? Maybe they give them a run for their money kind of thing. Who knows? And then one more thing I want to add is this is their first major bowl game since 1996, speaking of that team. And that's something that needs to be applauded for this Sun Devils program, 2024. All right, let's rank them. 1 to 7. Is 2024 my number 1 team? The answer is no. Are they my number 2 team? No. My top 2 teams are the teams that you would expect. I don't think it's the order you expect. Number 1 team, drum roll, is 1986 for me. I think that might not be a popular opinion. I think a lot of people are going to disagree and say it's the 1996 team. For what it's worth, that's my number 2. And I wouldn't put them that far apart from each other. The reason why I lean towards 1986 is the Rose Bowl win that they had. And that's arguably the greatest win in the history of the Sun Devils. Now, there is one big fat stain on that 1986 team, and that was a loss to U of A. And for a lot of people, that's probably what separates 1996 from 1986. But the reason I go with 86 is you were 10, 1, and 1. The tie is whatever. There's a reason we don't do ties anymore. It's because they're the absolute worst. That loss to U of A absolutely stunk. But other than that, I mean, you had 5 ranked wins that year. Number 20, Michigan State, number 16, UCLA, number 15, USC, number 6, Washington, and number 4, Michigan. That Michigan game was the Rose Bowl, the best possible game that ASU could have gone to that year. They went to it and they won. They weren't supposed to win. That was Michigan, blue blood program, and they won. And you look back and it's a legendary team. I mean, Jeff Van Raphorst by himself speaks to that team and how special it was. And you look at the rest of the team, and there's Hall of Famers for ASU. There's Hall of Famers in the NFL. Special team. I give that the edge over 1996, even with a Territorial Cup loss. But let's talk about 1996 now, which is number 2. And quite frankly, I could totally go 1A, 1B. But if I have to draw a line in the sand, I would give the edge to 1986. The 96 team, 11-1. They were 1 defensive drive away from going undefeated. And yes, that would have separated this team from 86 definitively. But they didn't. Horseshoes and hand grenades is what I like to say on this show. Close, not close enough. And this show does not believe in moral victories. There's no moral victory here. Great team. Similar to what I said about Jeff Van Raphorst, Jake Plummer speaks of the team by himself, but you also had Pat Tillman, two of the biggest faces in the history of the Sun Devils program, were on this team at the same time. Surprisingly, they only had one ranked win that year. They would have had another with number 4 Ohio State, but that one ranked win was the number 1 team in the nation, Nebraska. And it was a 19-0 shutout. 3 safeties in that game. When have you seen that before? Never. Never. That's just something that doesn't happen. But that was that ASU team. They had a great offense, and they had arguably an even better defense. Special year. Jake Plummer, by the way, was one of the 5 finalists for the Heisman Trophy. I want to say he was number 3. Don't quote me on that, though. Very special year. All right, is 2024 number 3? Nope. Number 3 for me, 1975. Because that was a team that was absolutely robbed of a national championship. That team deserved it, but unfortunately, because you played your sandlot football and nobody respected what ASU had done that year, it didn't matter. It didn't matter that they beat number 12 Arizona. So yes, Territorial Cup, and they beat number 6 Nebraska. Wow, we beat Nebraska a lot, don't we? Those are the little brothers for ASU, apparently. They beat Nebraska in the Fiesta Bowl, ASU, the father of the Fiesta Bowl, and they had a good team, man. That Dennis Sproul to John Jefferson connection is one of the most important and one of the greatest quarterback to receiver connections in the history of the program. Phenomenal season, should have been national champions. All right, is 2024 my number 4 team? Yes. 2024 is the 4th best team in the history of the Sun Devils, in my opinion. They rebounded from disaster in 2 years. In 2 years, they had rebounded from disaster. And they made the college football playoff, something that they have never done before. And they had a chance to win their first ever college football playoff game. They're right there. But again, horseshoes and hand grenades, and I don't believe in moral victories. Could have won, should have won, didn't win. That's all that matters. But it was a huge step in the right direction. Number 5, I am going with the 1970 Frank Kush football team. This was the start of the Frank Kush era. This was the season that really started to put ASU on the map, and teams were like, okay, maybe we need to watch a little bit more Arizona State. And again, there was a lot of like, oh, they're not playing anyone, blah, blah, blah. Again, they didn't have a ranked win that year, and the Territorial Cup was only a 10-6 win. But when they went to the Peach Bowl, a massive bowl game, and kicked the you-know-what out of North Carolina, 48-26, yeah, it's pretty hard not to notice that team. Not too many, like, oh my God, superstars on that team besides like J.D. Hill, but that was the establishment of the Frank Kush era. Number 6 for me, 1973. That was another year that ASU could have contended for Natty, but unfortunately, we talked earlier about that Utah game where they had 10 turnovers, and that is the stain. That might be the worst loss in the history of the Frank Kush era Sun Devils because of how it cost them a chance to have a perfect 12-0 season after an 11-0 season a few years prior. You go to the Fiesta Bowl. Fathers of Fiesta Bowl won the Fiesta Bowl over Pitt 28-7. That was also prime Danny White. Tons of great players on that team. Finally, the 2013 team is my 7th best team. Great team, couldn't finish. It was one of the most fun teams that we've had as well. That defense, man, there were so many fun players. Will Sutton, back-to-back, 2-time Defensive Player of the Year in the conference. Carl Bradford, what an underrated player he was. And then Taylor Kelly, who I have said before is one of the 3 best quarterbacks in Sun Devil history. You can debate me with that if you want. I stand firm that Taylor Kelly is top 3 all time. Jalen Strong, Zane Gonzalez, greatest kicker ever. It's actually kind of crazy that they were not able to get any super significant wins with their 2 chances against Stanford, and then their loss to Texas Tech. But again, I feel like they totally sold on the Texas Tech here. The only thing I'll leave you guys off with, again, is 2014. If you want to rip me for not having 2014, absolutely put it in the comments. Let's have a conversation. But which of these teams do you think is the greatest ever? Do you believe 1986 is the best or 1996? Am I fair on 2024? Is it too low? Does it need to be higher? Let me know in the comments. You can hit me up on Twitter at RichieBrads36. The podcast is there at LO_Sun Devils. Wherever you're getting your shows, hit like, subscribe, and turn on notifications. You will get the update whenever we post new content. I appreciate each and every single one of you for tuning in to make Locked On Sun Devils your first listen of the day. And a shout out to my everydayers who are here every day. We will be back tomorrow. That's right. You heard me. Tomorrow in the evening, probably shooting for about 4 or 5 o'clock. We will be going live on YouTube. We'll be having some fun conversations. I do not have a topic picked out at this time, but we will be going live tomorrow instead of on Sunday, because Sunday is the NFL championship games. And you better believe my happy ass is going to be plugged in front of a TV, and yours should be as well. So tune in tomorrow. Let's have a conversation and a good time talking ASU. I'll see you then. Until next time, you keep it locked right here on Locked On Sun Devils.